It started like any other day, the sun shining through the windows, casting golden streaks across the classroom as we settled into our seats. I remember the way our teacher's voice droned on about algebra as he wrote on the chalkboard, and I found myself trying to keep my eyes open. But within moments, that ordinary day wouldn't go as it normally should have, and it would be a day forever etched in my memory. It was during second period when the principal would begin to talk through the speakers, informing everyone that there was a stranger on the premises, and she instructed us all to remain calm and to stay in our classrooms, and she said that this is not a drill. We are under lockdown. Remain calm and stay in your current classroom. Do not leave your room for any reason. The words hung heavy in the air, overwhelming us with fear. Panic surged through the classroom as our teacher rushed and locked the door, almost falling once as he did so, also turning off the lights. We sat as quiet as we could, our hearts pounding rapidly as the girls began to cry. But it wasn't the announcement that scared me half to death. No, it was the sound of someone walking outside the door and down the hallway that had me almost swallow my tongue, especially hearing the person's footsteps grow louder with each passing second. And once he got close to our classroom, I could hear him muttering to himself, angry ramblings that was hard for me to understand. I knew it was stupid of me, especially not listening to my teacher who was demanding me to remain where I was. But it was stupid curiosity that had me sneak over and look through the window of the door, where I would see the man as he walked by, and he was very large, unnaturally so. He was looming outside our door, his voice slithered through the cracks, and it was like a nightmare unfolding around us, and I can still remember him saying these words.
"I can't find it. Where is it? They hid it from me."
I exchanged a glance with my friend Jake, his eyes wide with fear just like mine. We knew we had to stay quiet and pray that that guy didn't choose our room to unleash his madness on. But a period of time went by, and it felt like a long time as we heard him moving further down the hallway, his heavy steps fading, along with him slamming lockers as we heard his muffled curse words, and every second was like a dagger in my chest, a reminder of someone quite unhinged was just right outside of our classroom door. But out of nowhere, a scream would go ringing through our ears, and it was loud, deranged screaming that was heard coming from a distance, but it was too far away to tell who it belonged to. But it still scared the hell out of everyone, knowing that someone, somewhere, was possibly facing the unimaginable. We sat for a while afterwards, and it felt like time lost its meaning, and each second was an eternity of fear and uncertainty. We sat bunched together as whispers of prayers began coming from my fellow classmates. Hours passed, or perhaps mere minutes, I couldn't tell anymore, before we were informed that the police were there and are entering the building, followed by instructions to remain patient. I was flooded with relief, but still stuck with the fear of what had transpired in those hours of darkness. We heard the commotion outside of our door, the authoritative voices of law enforcement, which helped us relax more, knowing that they had arrived. And after a few minutes, our door would finally creak open as light flooded in from the hallway. Trembling yet relieved, we emerged from our hiding place, greeted by the somber faces of police officers ushering us out to safety. Outside, the sun hung low on the horizon, and I was happy to be able to see it again. Its gentle rays a stark contrast to the horrors we had endured inside of our school. Parents rushed to embrace their children with tears of relief and gratitude as the police conducted their search of our school, combing every inch of it for the deranged intruder. For some reason, he was never found, and it was as if he just vanished in the blink of an eye. I couldn't shake the feeling of fear while asking myself the question of where could he have gone. I didn't know, and no one did, but I just prayed that he doesn't return. Days turned into weeks, and the incident faded from our minds, replaced by the relentless march of time and the demands of everyday life. But for those of us who lived through that nightmare, the presence of that madman lingered, and is still a horrifying memory in our minds. The year was 2016, a time when the world seemed to be on the edge of chaos. It was autumn, and the time of Halloween, when a sinister presence came to our small town, and putting a lot of us on edge and plunging us into a scary time that still bothers me to this day. As we neared the school gates, walking side by side, whispers rippled through the crowd about clowns, and that single word put a bad feeling in my gut, conjuring images of painted faces twisted into malevolent grins, and they were everywhere during that time period. "They're right outside the school," someone muttered, their voice trembling with fear. "They're threatening anyone who crosses their path," the person also said out loud. Ethan and I looked around but didn't see anything, but did hurry into the school building with the sense of impending danger. The principal stood at the entrance, greeting us as we walked inside, his voice stuttering, showing how he was nervous and fearful. He said, "Due to safety concerns of a potential threat, we are initiating a lockdown. Head inside of your classroom and listen to the instructions your teachers will give you." Everyone started to freak out in the hallways as teachers ushered students into classrooms, locking doors and drawing blinds, and I found myself in English class, the once familiar surroundings now feeling like a possible tomb. At least that was my thoughts. And it was a moment in my life I thought I would never go through, and thought that it was just urban legends of weirdos looking to harm students by breaking into schools. But no, it actually happened to my school. And it wasn't long before the chaos unfolded, where creepy laughing came from the hall as multiple people began banging on lockers as they screamed out, and the shouts and screams pierced the air, a sympathy of scary moments orchestrated by those twisted clowns. And I heard rumors of them wielding weapons like knives, machetes, and axes, but never saw them personally. Ethan gripped my arm, his face full of disbelief and fear, as he asked me if I had his back if we had to fight for our lives, in which I told him that I did. I wanted to reassure him, to offer words of comfort, but the truth was, I was scared myself, and found it hard to utter words of encouragement. We were trapped in a terrifying situation, unsure of the outcome, but hopeful that none of us come into contact with the sickos that began to terrorize us. It was like a moment in a horror movie sitting in that classroom, as we waited to hear the distant sounds of sirens praying for the cops to arrive and arrest the people disguising themselves as clowns, who were possibly armed and looking to harm people. And thankfully, not too long after the disrupting sounds of the so-called clowns in the school's hallway ended, we would hear the voices of multiple men claiming to be officers on the other side of the door, and as our teacher peeked through the blinds of the door's windows, it was confirmed that it indeed was the police. Relief washed over us, and it was like a semi-truck was lifted off of my chest, and it was like I could breathe again. And I can tell it was like that for both my teacher and the other students, whose expressions turned from frowns to smiles, knowing that we were now safe. Finally, the all clear was given, and we were able to leave our classrooms, and was allowed to go home early due to what was taking place that day. But one of the most unsettling things surrounding that time was that the clowns had left before the cops arrived and were never found. Hell, as far as I know, they could have been a group of students that thought it would be a great idea to prank our school by using the clown pandemic and people's fear of killer clowns. But years have passed since the clown emergence. Hell, I have been out of school and am now working as a man, but it left me with a reminder that even in the most mundane of places, evil could appear, waiting to unleash its horrors upon the unsuspecting, and something tells me that those clowns were out to do more than just scare us, because some people saw them carrying weapons that they supposedly threatened people with. It was a typical Tuesday morning in my high school, when I was sitting in Mrs. Thompson's history class, half listening to her lecture on the Civil War while writing in my notebook. The classroom was filled with the usual sounds of shuffling papers and whispered conversations, interrupted only by the occasional squeak of sneakers on the linoleum floor, and the day was going how every day normally did. But out of nowhere, the intercom interrupted our class and every other, as the principal's voice filled the room with a sense of urgency. "Attention all students and staff. This is Principal Anderson. We are initiating a lockdown. I repeat, this is not a drill. Lock all doors, turn off lights, and remain quiet until further notice." Everyone, including me, started to panic as confusion spread throughout the classroom as we scrambled to follow the lockdown protocol. Mrs. Thompson quickly shut and locked the door, motioning for us to huddle in the corner away from the windows. My heart raced as I tried to make sense of the situation. Was it a threat from outside? A dangerous animal loose on campus? The possibility raced through my mind as we waited in silence. Minutes ticked by like hours, and the atmosphere grew increasingly stifling. The intercom remained silent, leaving us in the dark about what was happening outside of our classroom's walls. Fear gnawed at my gut, and I glanced around at my classmates, seeing the same unease mirrored in their faces. But that was also the moment when a series of muffled bangs echoed down the hallway, accompanied by heavy footsteps. My pulse skyrocketed, and I held my breath, praying that it was just a false alarm, but deep down, I knew it wasn't. And the sound of the classroom's door beginning to rattle violently confirmed all of my fears, causing a chill to come over me as I realized someone was trying to force their way in. Mrs. Thompson motioned for us to stay quiet, her hands trembling as she clutched the phone to her ear, presumably calling for help. The banging grew louder, more desperate, and I could hear a man's voice shouting unintelligibly on the other side, but seemed enraged. Suddenly, with a final crash against it, the door had bursted open, and a figure, clad in dark clothing, and seemed to be heavy on drugs, stormed into the room. He had pale skin, long scraggly hair, and bloodshot, darkened eyes that pierced through us. I gasped, my mind unable to process the terror unfolding before me, and couldn't believe what was happening. And the most heart-wrenching moment is when we noticed that the intruder brandished a knife, its glinting blade sending a wave of dread within all of us.
"Everyone stay where you are,"
the man bellowed out, his voice laced with madness.
"Nobody move or I'll start cutting,"
he said with an angry expression. Panic erupted in the classroom as students screamed and scrambled away from the intruder. I felt paralyzed, my body refusing to obey as the man prowled among us, his eyes wild and frenzied. He seemed to relish in the chaos he had unleashed, reveling in the fear that gripped us all. As the minutes dragged on, the intercom crackled back to life as a man's voice began to speak, who was claiming to be the school's resource officer. And the officer would state that the cops had the building surrounded, and asked for the man to drop the weapon he had and surrender peacefully. And it was obvious that he was talking to the psycho that then held my class hostage. The intruder just laughed, and it was chilling to hear, and it was a cruel sound that sent shivers down my spine, and so did the exact words that he spoke right after.
"You think I'm afraid? I'll make everyone regret ever crossing me."
I huddled closer to my classmates, trying to block out the terror and focus on staying alive, and it felt like an eternity passed by before the sound of heavy boots echoed through the hallway, signaling the arrival of law enforcement. Rushing into our classroom was a SWAT team of officers who did not hesitate to confront the maniac. Their weapons were drawn, their expressions intense and determined, but their presence caused the intruder to lunge at them with his knife flailing, but he was quickly overwhelmed by the sheer force of trained professionals. 5 officers wrestled the deranged man to the floor, his screams and curses filling the air. It was a chaotic moment of violence and control, a stark contrast to the terrified stillness that had us gripped moments before. Finally, with a collective effort, they managed to subdue the intruder and disarm him as they dragged him away, his face contorted with rage and madness. I couldn't help but feeling unnerved at the sight of his expression, realizing that our situation could have ended much worse than it did. The lockdown was lifted, and paramedics tended to the shaken students and staff. I sat there numb and exhausted, trying to process the terror that had engulfed our school. Thankfully, the deranged man was taken away in handcuffs, his fate now in the hands of the justice system. In the days that followed, the incident was dissected by the community. Questions arose about how such a breach could occur, and debates raged about school security measures and mental health support. But for me and my classmates, the scars of that day ran deep, a reminder of the fragility of safety and the unexpected terror that lurks amongst us. As I walked out of school that afternoon, I couldn't shake the feeling of unease, knowing that the world around us was never really safe as we wished it to be. But I am thankful that no one was injured or worse by the hands of that man, who decided that our school and the people who attended it was a target.